Long before history learned to write itself in ink and stone, before names were carved into memory by kings or wars, there was a people who lived quietly beneath the open sky. They did not know the word Neanderthal. They did not know they would one day be spoken of in museums and textbooks, reduced to bones and measurements. They only knew the rhythm of the land, the warmth of fire, and the sound of each other's breathing in the dark. The valley was alive then, rivers moved freely, forests stood thick and generous, and the air carried the smell of wet earth and leaves. Winter came, but it came gently, like a warning rather than a threat. Snow fell and melted. Ice visited and then retreated. The people learned the seasons as one learns a familiar face, reading change not with fear, but with patience. At dawn, smoke rose from shallow shelters, built of wood, hide, and stone. Fire slept at their center, its embers guarded through the night like a living thing. Children stirred first, small bodies wrapped in animal skins, blinking into the pale morning light. They did not wake to alarms or walls. They woke to wind, to birds, to the low murmur of adults already moving. Karan rose slowly, his joints stiff from the cold ground. He had seen many winters, enough to feel them before they arrived. He pressed his palm against the earth, as if listening. The ground felt different now, harder, colder. The land spoke in ways words could not, and he had learned to listen. Nearby, his mate fed the fire, coaxing flame from glowing coals. The fire answered, brightening, crackling softly around it. Others gathered brothers, sisters, elders whose hair had turned the color of ash. They shared food without counting, tearing dried meat with practiced hands, passing it silently. Hunger was not yet desperate, but it lingered closer than before. The children watched the adults with wide, serious eyes. They learned by watching how to strike stone against stone until sparks leaped, how to hold a blade so it cut cleanly, how to read the sky. No one told them to be quiet. Silence came naturally, shaped by the need to listen. That morning the wind arrived earlier than it should have. It crept into the valley like a stranger, sharp and impatient. Leaves trembled, birds lifted suddenly, scattering. Karan felt it against his face and frowned. He looked toward the mountains, their peaks faint beneath cloud and mist. Something was changing there. The elders spoke little, but when they did, the others listened. One of them traced lines in the dirt with a finger, circles within circles, marking the passing of years. He pressed hard at the last line, deeper than the rest. His meaning was clear. The cold was no longer a visitor. It was learning the way. The people moved that day with purpose. Shelters were reinforced. Hides were stretched and stitched tighter. Stone was gathered. The young men prepared spears, testing their balance, their weight. The women checked stores of dried roots and meat, counting not with numbers but with memory. As the sun climbed, a hunt was planned. The herds had begun to move differently, drifting south earlier than expected. To lose them would mean hunger when the snow deepened. Karan joined the others, his breath steady, his mind clear. Hunting was not violence to them. It was a conversation with life, one that required respect and precision. They moved across the land in silence, feet knowing where to fall. The ground was firmer now, crunching faintly beneath them. Frost clung to the edges of grass, even as the sun shone. They found the tracks they were looking for, pressed deep into the earth, large, heavy, good meat, but dangerous. When the moment came, it came quickly. Spears flew. The animal fell. Its breath steamed in the cold air as life left it. The hunters stood still for a moment, heads lowered. One placed a hand on the animal's flank, a gesture of thanks older than memory itself. Survival did not erase reverence. They returned with the kill as clouds thickened overhead. Snow began to fall before night, light at first, then heavier. Children laughed, catching flakes on their tongues, unaware that this snow would not leave quickly. That night the fire burned brighter. Meat was shared, fat sizzling, filling the air with warmth and smell. Stories passed from mouth to mouth, not as entertainment but as memory. Stories of winters past, of storms that lasted many days, of people who walked into the white and did not return. As sleep settled over the camp, Karan remained awake. He listened to the wind press against the shelters. He watched the fire breathe. He thought of the children, their small hands wrapped around warm stone, their trust placed entirely in the adults who stood guard over their future. The land that had fed them, sheltered them, and taught them was changing its face. It was becoming something harsher, something that would test every skill they possessed and every bond they shared. They did not know that this was only the beginning. They did not know that the cold would return again and again for hundreds of thousands of years. They only knew this moment, the fire, the snow, the people beside them, and they held it close. Outside, the world began to turn white. Please like, share, and subscribe my channel. The snow did not leave when the sun returned. It stayed pressed into the ground, hardened by wind and time, layering itself day after day until the land no longer remembered its own color. Paths vanished. Familiar stones disappeared beneath white skin. The valley that once felt open and generous now narrowed, closing around the people like a tightening fist. Morning no longer arrived with birdsong. It came with silence, thick and heavy. Breath rose in pale clouds from every mouth, even inside the shelters. The fire had become the heart of everything. Without it, there would be no morning at all. Corin woke before the others, as he often did now. Sleep came lightly these days, broken by the sound of the wind or the cry of a child turning in their dreams. He fed the fire carefully, guarding the last dry wood like treasure. Flames answered slowly, reluctant in the cold. He leaned close, feeling warmth creep back into his fingers. Food grew harder to find. The herds had moved farther than expected, and hunting became a gamble with hunger as the price of failure. Some days the hunters returned with nothing but frost on their lashes and exhaustion in their bones. On those nights, meals were smaller, passed more carefully, children fed first, elders next. No words were needed. The rules were written into them. A child cried one evening, his stomach empty, his body shaking despite the skins wrapped around him. His mother held him close, rocking gently, humming a low sound without melody. Corin watched from across the fire, feeling the weight of the cold press inward. He remembered winters long past, but none that bit this deep, this early. The storms came without warning. The sky would darken suddenly, the wind rising with a howl that flattened grass and erased tracks within moments. When the storms hit, the people did not move. They huddled together, bodies pressed close, listening to the world rage outside. Snow pushed against the shelters, piling high, sealing them in. Time slowed, measured only by breath and the steady glow of embers. Loss came quietly, the way it always did. An elder did not wake one morning, his breath gone sometime in the night. His face was calm, as if sleep had simply claimed him more deeply than the others. The people did not cry out. They gathered around him, touching his hands, his brow committing the shape of him to memory. The ground was too hard to dig. Stone resisted their efforts, frozen and unyielding. They carried him to a shallow hollow, lined it with hides, and laid him to rest beneath stones and snow. One of the women placed a tool beside him, another a piece of dried meat. They stood in silence as the wind carried snow over his body, sealing him into the land. After that, the cold felt closer, heavier, as if it had noticed them. The hunters began to take greater risks. They traveled farther, stayed out longer, returned with frostbitten fingers and bloodied hands. One man came back limping, his leg torn by an animal's horn. He should have been left behind. Everyone knew it. Instead, they carried him. Days passed as they tended his wound. They cleaned it, wrapped it, fed him even when food was scarce. Infection crept in, fever following close behind. The man cried out in his sleep, his body burning while the world outside froze. A woman sat beside him through the nights, cooling his skin with snow, whispering sounds meant to comfort, not to cure. He lived. When he finally stood again, weak but breathing, something shifted among them. The cold had taken much, but it had not taken their will to protect one another. Fire became sacred in ways it had not been before. Embers were never allowed to die. When the people moved, the fire moved with them, carried carefully in bark and stone. Children were taught to guard it before they were taught to hunt. Without fire, there was no survival. The cold pressed deeper into the land. Rivers slowed, then stopped, locked beneath ice. Trees cracked in the night, sharp sounds echoing through the darkness. Even the stars seemed farther away, dimmed by the endless white below. One night, the storm was so fierce the shelters shook. Snow forced its way inside, melting against warm skin before freezing again. A child stopped breathing in the darkness, his small body too weak to fight the cold any longer. His mother's cry broke the silence, sharp and raw, cutting through the wind. They gathered around the child as they had the elder, holding him, warming him, hoping for breath to return. It did not. The fire burned low as grief settled among them, heavy and quiet. No one spoke. Words would not change what had happened. They buried him beside the elder when the storm passed, small stones marking his place. The snow covered them both before night fell again. The days grew shorter. The sun stayed low, offering little warmth. Hunger sharpened every movement, every thought. Yet still they shared. Still they stayed together. The cold took those who strayed, those who weakened, but it did not break the circle. One evening, as the fire crackled and the wind eased for the first time in many days, Karen looked around at the faces lit by flame, scarred, thin, tired, alive. He felt something rise in his chest, something stronger than fear. The world had turned against them, but they had not turned against each other. Outside, the snow lay deep and endless. Inside, the fire held. Please like, share, and subscribe my channel. The cold did not soften, but the people learned its shape. They learned how it moved, how it hid, how it waited. Survival was no longer only about strength or endurance. It became about memory, patience, and care. They learned to shape the hides differently, cutting and sewing them so the wind could not slip through the seams. Fur was turned inward, leather outward. Children were wrapped tighter, their small bodies protected by layers shaped with intention. Hands, once numb, now stayed warm longer. It was a small victory, but it mattered. Stone tools changed as well. The blades grew thinner, sharper, shaped with skill passed from elder to youth. Corin watched as a boy struck stone again and again, failing, adjusting, learning. When the blade finally split clean, the boy's face lit with pride. Corin placed a hand on his shoulder. No words were needed. Knowledge had moved forward. Fire was no longer just warmth. It was a place where time slowed. At night, when the wind eased and the snow settled, the people gathered close. Shadows danced on the shelter walls as flames flickered. An elder traced shapes in the ash, telling stories with his hands and voiced stories of hunts long past, of storms survived, of ancestors whose names were carried not in sound, but in action. A woman sang softly one evening, a low rhythm that rose and fell like breath. It was not a song meant for joy or sorrow, but for endurance. The children listened, eyes heavy, bodies relaxed. Outside, the cold waited. Inside, something gentle took hold. Care became the measure of strength. When an older woman's legs weakened, two younger ones walked beside her each day, steadying her, adjusting their pace to match hers. When a child fell ill, the camp shifted around him. Food was brought. Firewood was gathered closer. Hands rested on his skin, checking warmth, offering comfort. He survived because he was not alone. Karen felt the years in his bones now. His movements slowed, his breath sometimes caught in his chest. Still, he showed the children how to read tracks in snow, how to listen for the change in wind that meant a storm was coming. He showed them how to watch the animals not as prey, but as teachers. The animals knew where to go. The people learned to follow. One winter night, a storm trapped them for many days. Snow sealed the shelters completely. The world reduced to firelight and breath. Food ran low. Hunger gnawed, but persistent. The children slept more, conserving energy. The adults spoke less, saving strength. On the fourth night, the wind finally quieted. Corin and two others dug their way out, their hands raw and bleeding. The world outside was silent, buried, transformed. Tracks were gone, landmarks erased. For a moment, disorientation threatened to take hold. Then they stopped, listened. A faint sound reached them, the movement of animals beneath the snow. The subtle signs of life continuing despite everything. Hope returned, quiet and steady. The hunt that followed was dangerous, exhausting, and necessary. They worked together with precision born of long practice. When the animal fell, the relief was overwhelming. Meat meant life. Fat meant warmth. Bone meant tools. Nothing would be wasted. That night, the fire burned brighter than it had in weeks. The people ate slowly, savoring each bite. Children smiled again, grease on their chins. Laughter returned, tentative at first, then stronger. The sound felt unfamiliar, like something remembered from another time. Later, as the others slept, Karen sat awake by the fire. He watched a young man and woman curled together, sharing warmth, their hands intertwined. He watched a child dream, his fingers twitching as if running through snow that no longer frightened him. Karen knew he would not see many more winters. The thought did not bring fear. It brought a sense of completion. The knowledge had been passed. The fire would be guarded. The children would grow, adapt, endure. Outside, the stars burned cold and distant above the white land. Inside, the fire whispered, steady and alive. The cold had not broken them. It had shaped them into something stronger than it could ever understand. Please like, share, and subscribe my channel. The world did not end with a single storm or a final winter. It changed slowly, almost gently, the way a breath fades from warm to cool. The ice that had ruled the land for so long began, in some places, to loosen its grip. Snow melted earlier, rivers stirred beneath their frozen skins. New plants pushed through soil that had not felt the sun in many generations. But people noticed these changes, just as their ancestors had noticed the first warnings of cold. They watched carefully, they adapted, as they always had. Some valleys grew kinder, others became unpredictable, swinging between harsh winters and uncertain summers. Survival demanded movement now, not endurance alone. Karen did not walk with them much anymore. His body had grown light and fragile, his breath shallow. He spent his days near the fire, listening, watching the children who now stood where he once had. They carried spears shaped by his hands. They spoke through gestures he had taught them. His presence lingered in every movement they made. One morning he did not wake. The people gathered around him in silence. There was no panic, no fear, only recognition. They touched his hands, his face, tracing the lines time had carved. He had lived as the land demanded. He had given what he could. That was enough. They laid him to rest carefully, placing him where the sun would reach him when it returned. A tool rested beside him. A piece of red stone marked his place, its color standing out against the pale earth. The children watched closely. This was how memory survived. Life continued, because it had to. Seasons shifted. The herds changed their paths. New sounds entered the land, voices shaped differently, tools made in unfamiliar ways. The people saw others who walked upright, like them, who hunted, who carried fire. They watched each other from a distance at first, wary but curious. Sometimes there was conflict, sometimes there was sharing, sometimes there was quiet merging, families forming where once there had been separation. No one marked the moment it began. No one could have. The old ways did not vanish overnight. They faded, blending into something new. Children were born who carried traces of both worlds, their bodies and minds shaped by long survival and new possibilities. The blood of the old people flowed forward, unseen but enduring. Over time, the shelters changed. The stories changed. The land changed again. The people who had once endured endless white winters became fewer, then quieter, then only memory. But memory does not disappear simply because voices fall silent. It remains in the way hands shape tools with care, in the instinct to share warmth, in the urge to protect the weak, in the quiet knowledge that survival is never a solitary act. Long after the last footprints faded beneath new soil, long after the fire pits turned to stone, their legacy continued, carried not in monuments, but in bodies, in breath, in blood. If you listen closely, you can still hear them, in the way humans gather when the world grows cold, in the comfort found around firelight, in the deep, unspoken understanding that we survive together or not at all. The ice age is past, the land transformed, the people endured in ways history would only later begin to understand. They are not gone, they are still here. Please like, share and subscribe my channel.